So I spent the first half of this summer visiting every state park in Minnesota. I had tons of fun exploring all corners of Minnesota, especially after over a year of not doing state parks. I have a few things I want to say before I get into the ranking. First, I want to thank everyone I stayed with. Both pairs of my grandparents let me stay more than 2 weeks at their houses, and I'm super grateful for that. I also want to thank Dave and Vicky Bowe of Moorhead and Bruce Osborne of Big Fork, Minnesota. You guys really made sure my journey could be completed. I also want to thank my parents for getting a place on the north shore of Lake Superior in mid-July. Now for the format of the video. I will be going through the parks from worst to best and mentioning all the important details I can remember from each park. The rankings are done from a day hiker's point of view, so campground amenities will not factor into the ranking. Here is a map of all the parks and the legend to go with it. You can pause the video if you need to see it. The base map is the Level 4 Ecoregions map of Minnesota for the EPA. I also made the typical regions map that I usually make, and I also still have the tier system in place with S, A, B, C, D, E, and F tiers. With that, let's get into the parks. 66. Lac Qui Parle. Okay, so this park might have just had a stroke of bad luck. It definitely could have placed higher, but my access to the park was limited. The park is on a lake made out of the Minnesota River, and the entire lower unit of the park was closed due to the extremely high water on the Minnesota River at the time. Because of this, I was left with only the upper unit to explore, as the entire lower unit was flooded. But not only that, the lower unit contained 3 of the 4 miles of trails there. I drove to the upper unit and parked to do the 0.7 mile trail out and back along the lake. Within the first quarter mile, I had to turn back because the mayflies were so bad. It was truly unfortunate for the park, but the lack of a good experience, or barely any experience at all, sent the 900-acre park to the bottom of the list. 65. Sakatah Lake. I was lucky to visit most of these bottom parks early in the journey. Sakatah Lake State Park is an 810-acre park in LeSawyer County. Not only was this park mosquito-filled, but it also just felt unoriginal with all the other lake parks around Minnesota. I hiked 4 miles here, and to give you a sense of the mosquitoes, my average pace was 3.8 miles per hour. I ran most of the section along the lake where the mosquitoes were the worst. If Minnesota were to cut one of its state parks, this would be the one to cut. 64. Hill Annex Mine. This was the only park in the F tier that I visited in the second half of my journey. The park used to offer tours of one of the open pit Iron Range mines, but they lost all their tour staff a few years ago, leaving the park as just a museum and an overlook. I will say the park has a nice change of pace from all the hiking I had been doing, and the guy at the museum was very enthusiastic, but as a state park it ranks near the bottom of the list. The 600-acre park is actually closing in summer of 2023, and the land the museum is on is just going to be managed by the city of Calumet, where the park is located. So if you want to visit this place while it's still a state park, you better go within the next year. 63. Wild River. Wild River State Park was the 5th state park I visited on my journey, so it remained near the bottom of the list for a long time. The 6,600-acre park is a good preserve of the St. Croix River, but the land just isn't interesting. It was mostly a flat walk through alternating woods and grasslands. Not only that, the park is very much a horseback destination, meaning all the trails were very sandy and hard to hike on. Not a whole lot else to say about this one, but the park is not super interesting. 62. Fort Ridgely. The Minnesota River Valley was when the mosquitoes first came out on my journey, and the parks weren't that interesting, so the region suffered greatly. The highest ranked park in the region is in the bottom third of the list. Fort Ridgely State Park is a 537-acre park located midway up the Minnesota River as it makes its way downstream towards Mankato. The park was established around the old Fort Ridgely, used in the U.S.-Dakota War. The park suffered not only from mosquitoes, but a lack of clarity in the trail map. The trail map showed there were 3 creek crossings, and I was planning on using all of them, but one was not bridged. And since the water was so high and fast, I had to hike the half-mile trek back down to the other bridge and then go back north on the west side of the creek. Rather annoying. There were a few good overlooks of the valley, but not without going through hordes of mosquitoes. These reasons were why this park suffered. 61. Upper Sioux Agency. Upper Sioux Agency State Park is a 1,065-acre park located just upstream from Fort Ridgely on the Minnesota River. I had almost no mosquito issues here, but the trail conditions in this park were terrible. From overgrown trails to waterlogged and muddy areas, they made my day hell. Not only that, but there really weren't any good overlooks of the valley at this park. I just noticed that this park ranked last on all trails for the state parks in Minnesota, kind of a based ranking. This was also the last park in the F tier. Every park onward will be E tier or above. 60. Kilen Woods. Entering the E tier, we have Kilen Woods, a 202-acre park in Jackson County on the Des Moines River. The park wasn't that bad, just uninteresting compared to what some of the other parks had to offer. The park had 5 miles of trails, and I did 3 of them. And as someone who lived near the Des Moines River further south, it was interesting to see it closer to its headwaters. Aside from the hills along the Des Moines River, the park didn't really offer much else, which is why it ranked so low. 59. Charles A. Lindbergh. Moving a little further north, we have Charles A. Lindbergh State Park, a 417-acre park outside of Little Falls in Morrison County. The park has 7 miles of trails centered around Pike Creek, which flows directly into the Mississippi River inside the park. The mosquitoes were absolutely brutal here. I ran most of the forested part of the hike because they were so bad. However, the one place they didn't hang out was the bridges over Pike Creek, which was the best part of the hike, so I stopped on those to take it all in. Even with the dense forest and quiet creek, the mosquitoes were too much to push this park any higher, resulting in it ranking 59th. 58. Lake Louise. Minnesota's southernmost state park ranks 58th on the list. The 849-acre park lies just 1.5 miles from the Iowa border. The park is centered around one of Minnesota's few man-made lakes. Lake Louise is made by the damming of the upper Iowa River near its headwaters and is extremely small. The park has 12 miles of trails, and I did 8 of them. The park mainly ranked where it did because the scenery not being as good as some of the other parks on the list. But there were a few other reasons. First, there were no trail maps at the trail intersections, something common at other Minnesota state parks. This resulted in me having to get out my phone every time I hit a fork in the trail. The park also didn't say that the creek crossings would have no bridge. I was able to cross them, but I would have planned differently if I knew there weren't bridges. 57. Old Mille. Old Mille is the furthest north we've been yet on this ranking. The park is 287 acres in Marshall County, about 30 miles from the Manitoba border. The park definitely would have ranked higher if it had better drainage. So many of the trails were totally waterlogged and some were impassable because of it. This resulted in me having to cut through the woods a lot. Overall, this was the main reason this park suffered, with the area along the Middle River being quite scenic in itself. Lots of nice overlooks along the river, and a CCC stone bridge to boot. 56. Big Stone Lake. Of the 6 parks in the Minnesota River Valley region of the map, this will be the 5th you've heard about already. Not looking good for that region. Big Stone Lake State Park is 980 acres in Big Stone County. The park lies on Big Stone Lake on the South Dakota border. I went to this park on the same day as Lac Qui Parle, so there were mayflies, but it was much windier at Big Stone Lake, leading to them being less of an issue. The park's trail system is limited, and if I wanted to hike on Big Stone Lake, I would definitely just go to Hartford Beach State Park on the South Dakota side of the lake. That park is more interesting and has better views. 55. Zippel Bay. Now we find ourselves at Minnesota's northernmost state park. We find ourselves at Zippel Bay, a 2,800-acre park located on Lake of the Woods. While that may sound nice, 2 things really became problems. First, the lake level was really high when I visited, meaning only one of the access points of the 3 for the lake was actually usable, making my hike much longer. Second, the trail system in the park is really limited, meaning I was walking along the roads for almost all of it. If the lake level was lower, the park probably would have ranked higher because you can walk all the way out to the lights at the end of the jetty in a normal year, but that was not the case when I visited. 54. Monson Lake. Monson Lake State Park is a 343-acre park located in Swift County, about 2.5 hours west of the Twin Cities. The park only has a mile of trails, which is one of the reasons it ranked so low. The thing that saved it from being lower, however, is the amount of dragonflies at this park. There were so many that mosquitoes were not even a factor that day. I didn't even have to put on bug spray. It was nice not having to worry about them that day. 53. Rice Lake. Moving south again, Rice Lake State Park is a 712-acre park in Dodge County east of Owatonna. The park has 5 miles of trails, and I did about 4 of them. I did Rice Lake on the same day as I did Sakatah Lake, so I was expecting hordes of mosquitoes, but to my surprise, I had no issues. It was a nice walk through the woods and prairie, and the park had a nice shoreline on Rice Lake. The park also had a nice fishing pier that I could walk out on and get a better view of the lake from, so that was nice as well. 52. Hayes Lake. I actually have quite a bit to say about this park. Hayes Lake is a 2,100-acre park located in Roseau County. The lake is made by the damming of the Roseau River, and the park has 13 miles of trails. It was nice to read on the trail map that the river crossing was not bridged, so I didn't have to bother with it. Because of this, I stayed on the north side of the lake. First, the bad things. There were an insane amount of deer flies, which were really annoying, and any trail away from the lake was quite waterlogged. Not only that, but the woods were much denser than Old Mill, so I got quite a few scratches trekking through them to get around the pools of water. Once I hit the lake, though, the park did a complete 180. The lake was what someone would think of when you said Minnesota, a combination of deciduous and pine trees surrounding it. It was super cool. The lake was nice and blue because of the sky, and there were some good overlook decks and fishing docks to go out on. Not only that, but the bugs on the lakeside were non-existent. All the water flowing through the spillway was a nice dark brown color in standard northern Minnesota fashion. I was really impressed with the lakeside of the park and would probably go back there in the spring or fall. 51. Flandrau. Flandrau State Park is located in New Ulm. The park is 840 acres and has 8 miles of trails. The park runs along the last few miles of the Cottonwood River before it flows into the Minnesota. Besides Sakatah Lake, this was when the mosquitoes started. It poured rain the night before, leaving it really humid outside. I hiked 6 miles at this park, and they were all reasonably interesting, just buggy. I'm not even going to talk about how I almost got electrocuted by jumping over an electric fence that was in the wrong place. This was the highest ranked park in the Minnesota River Valley region of the map. 50. Lake Shetek. Lake Shetek State Park is an 1,100-acre park in Murray County. The park is located on the eastern shore of the largest lake in southwest Minnesota. The hike started out fine, but then I got away from the campground and the people. That's when the mosquitoes found me. Not only that, these mosquitoes didn't mind the sun. I honestly didn't understand. Luckily, I eventually made it around the inner edge of the park back to the lake, and once I started on the causeway out to the island, I had no issues with mosquitoes because the breeze on the causeway. The park has a good set of trails, but the mosquitoes and the fact that other parks were more interesting put it down here. 49. Mille Kathio. Okay, if this park didn't have a 100-foot tall fire tower, it would probably be dead last. That gives you an idea of how valuable a good view is to me. My first ever view of Mille Lake was actually from the fire tower at this park, which was super cool. Now on to the many bad things. First, mosquitoes. Most parks have a place to get away from them. This one did not. It was just non-stop mosquitoes everywhere I went. Next, the amount of unnecessary hills in this park was just insane. Third, it's called Mille Kathio, but the only place you can see Mille Lake from the park is from the fire tower, so the park's name is a little misleading. And finally, this was the park where I had a grouse run after me. It didn't get me, but it was annoying and scary. I had to backtrack about a quarter of a mile because of it. The park is 9,800 acres and contains 35 miles of trails. I was going to hike for 15 miles and cut the hike 7 miles short because it was so bad. Rant over. 48. Mccarthy Beach. I almost got totally lost in this park. It had stormed many times before I got there, so there were many trees down on the trail. One time there were 5 trees down all in one place, and I tried to go around them on the left, and I thought I made it, but then I looked at my watch to find I was going back the way I had came. I tried going around on the right this time, and I did make it. There were definitely bugs at this park, especially on the back half of this hike. but the end of the hike was rather pleasant and wet as I walked along Pickerel Lake to get back to my car. That was definitely the best area in the 1,900-acre park. This was also the final park of the E tier. Every park above this I would definitely consider going back to. 47. Franz Jevne. Coming in at number 47, we have Minnesota's smallest state park at 118 acres. Franz Jevne State Park is probably the least known state park in Minnesota. It's located in Couchiching County along the Rainy River on the Canadian border. I went to this park when transitioning from Moorhead to Big Fork on my journey from northwest to northeast. The park is really just a nice set of woods on the Rainy River, but the highlight is the rock outcrop in the middle of the park that has a picnic table on top of it. While that may seem like a big up for the park, there was some difficulty getting up there. First, it said there was a trail that led up to the outcrop, but it took me 15 minutes to realize that there wasn't one, and you just had to find your own way up there. I did eventually make it up by climbing behind a storage shed, and the view was unimpressive, but it was a nice atmosphere with the picnic table and the rocks. 46. Lake Carlos. I honestly wish this park ranked higher. I had been to it before my journey when we stayed in Alexandria for a week-long vacation. The lake is super clear and you can see lots of fish, but the amount of mosquitoes really killed the fun for me. The best trails are definitely along the lake, but there's some impressive areas further back in the grassland area as well. The park is 1,175 acres and I hiked 7 miles there. 45. Split Rock Creek. Down in the southwest corner of the state, we have the 947-acre Split Rock Creek State Park. This park is small and only contains 4 miles of trails, but the park also owns an additional 5 miles of horse trails less than a mile from the lake. The park is centered around a small man-made lake called Split Rock Lake. Split Rock Creek actually flows into the Big Sioux River in Sioux Falls, and Palisades State Park in South Dakota is also located on the tributary. Split Rock Creek State Park is much less interesting than Palisades, but the area down by the spillway is a place I would recommend. There are some rock outcrops down there, and the spillway is like a giant waterfall. 44. Fort Snelling. Entering the middle third of the parks at number 44, I have the good old Fort Snelling State Park right smack dab in the middle of the Twin Cities. Lots of Minnesotans know about this 1,825-acre park at the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. The park is mostly flat throughout, however, I would recommend the Pike Island Trail for a hike, as it's the most straightforward of the trails in the park. The park actually straddles 3 counties, Dakota, Hennepin, and Ramsey, and you can cross between Hennepin and Ramsey while hiking in the park. 43. St. Croix. Heading an hour and a half north, we arrive at St. Croix State Park in Pine County. At 31,775 acres, it is Minnesota's largest state park, and you can definitely tell while you are in the park. The park has almost 130 miles of trails, and I did 16 of them. The mosquitoes were terrible here, and the trail conditions were not great either, but a few things made up for that. First, the Kettle River was a river I walked along while in the park, and it was quite scenic. Second, I finished my hike at the fire tower, which had absolutely amazing views. This was my first fire tower of the 3 I hit while doing Minnesota state parks, so I was completely blown away. Finally, I wasn't going to go to a 32,000-acre park without taking a drive through the rest of the park. I'm so glad I did, as when I was driving back to the entrance, I saw 3 bear cubs playing in the road, and their mom quickly sent them up a tree when I got closer to them. When I made it to where they were, the mother disappeared into the bushes. Another thing to note about this park, when you enter the park, the first sign you see is Park Office, 5 miles. The second sign you see is Speed Limit, 50. That should give you a sense as to how big the park actually is. When you get to the office, you can drive one of 3 ways. It's not far to get down to the river, but the road runs 6 miles east and 8 miles west in the park. It is truly a massive park. 42. Myre-Big Island. Moving south central, we arrive at Myre-Big Island State Park on Albert Lee Lake. The park is 1,578 acres and has 16 miles of trails. I did 10 miles of hiking here, and you can really divide the park into 3 loops: the Prairie Loop, the Esker Loop, and the Island Loop. The Prairie Loop is 4 miles and is composed of the prairie trails on the west side of the park. The Esker Loop is 3 miles and uses the trails on the northeast part of the park, with lots of small ponds and marshes. The island loop is simply the 1-mile trail around the island in the middle of the lake. If you do all three, you will end up with a 10-mile hike like I did, but the esker and island loop were definitely the more interesting of the three. 41. Itasca. Okay, I know some Minnesotans are going to grill me for this one, but as a day hiker, Itasca isn't that great. I hiked 12 of the 49 miles of trails they had, and most were very mosquito-ridden. I did get to see some lakes that many people won't see when they visit the park, like Zippel Lake, Iron Corner Lake, and Gilfillan Lake. These remote lakes at the south end of the park weren't super rewarding to access due to the amount of mosquitoes in Itasca, but I bet in the fall they would be amazing. I went up the fire tower here too, and it had the most impressive view of the three. No big lake or river valley, but unrivaled endless trees, just as far as the eye could see. Truly amazing. I also finished my hike on Lake Itasca, which was also a very nice lake. And because Itasca State Park is 30,553 acres, you know I had to drive the wildlife loop to see the rest of the park. I stopped at Elk Lake along the loop as well. To give you a perspective as to how bad the mosquitoes were, though, my average hiking pace there was 4.1 miles per hour. 40. Buffalo River. Buffalo River is an 1,100-acre park in Clay County just east of Moorhead. The park is mostly grassland, but is forested immediately along the river. The park was a great change of scenery from the forested stuff I was dealing with, also no mosquitoes. I hiked 7.5 miles there, all were great. The main thing I remember here is the amount of different wildflowers I saw at this park, lots of different colors and sizes. The river is young, so there are lots of bends in it, making for some great overlooks. 39. Crow Wing. This 2,300-acre park was kind of hit or miss. Maybe that's because the park was half prairie and half forest. The mosquitoes stayed off the paved trail, which was nice for the first half of the hike, but over time I got into the unpaved trails, which were quite populated with mosquitoes. Luckily, there was a nice breeze right along the river that kept them from getting too bad. The river was great for hiking, if I'm honest. Lots of interesting spots to see it from, there was even a boardwalk. However, I would stay away from the south end of the park if I were to do it again. The mosquitoes were terrible, and it was not an interesting trail. 38. Lake Bronson. Being up near Canada is honestly crazy. Lake Bronson State Park is 2,806 acres in Kittson County. It is Minnesota's northwesternmost state park and the furthest state park from the Twin Cities at over 400 miles by road travel. The park has a well-structured trail system and really shows the transition zone between the Great Plains and northern forests. That's the great thing about northern Minnesota. It's the only place in the U.S. where that transition exists, with anywhere further south having the eastern temperate forests as a barrier. The lake is a man-made lake, and the spillway area is a super cool place to hang out. Lots of fishermen and fast-running water. The park also has an observation tower that was built by the WPA, which looks super cool. Lake Bronson State Park is also the highest-ranked state park in the northwestern region of the state. 37. Scenic. There is definitely a correlation between parks with fire towers and parks with lots of bugs. It's obviously that the parks are heavily forested, but I thought it was funny that the 4 worst parks for bugs were the ones with fire towers. With that being said, I couldn't climb the fire tower at Scenic State Park because it was in disrepair. I could probably try if I wanted to. There was a hole in the fence, but I didn't want to risk it. The 2,400-acre park did rank higher than the other parks with fire towers, though. It's because the park does live up to its name. It is a scenic park. The boardwalk along Coon Lake and the Chase Point Trail are clear highlights of this park, and they are some of the better areas in the North Woods. 36. William O'Brien. This 1,783-acre park in Washington County was the 3rd park I visited on my journey. The park showcases the transition from the southern plains of Minnesota to the northern forests. I hiked 13 miles at this park, and I experienced all the different landscapes of the park. The area down by the St. Croix is well forested and reminds me of more northern parks. Once you get up away from the river, the park gets a grassland landscape. I think the only reason this park didn't rank higher was because of the sunny conditions on the day I visited, causing me to get burnt. 35. Savanna Portage. This park definitely would have ranked higher if there were no bugs. Like, it would have made the top 15. Savanna Portage State Park is located in Aiken County. The park is Minnesota's third largest at 15,277 acres and contains 27 miles of trails. The highlight of the park is its location. The park is located on the continental divide between the Gulf of Mexico and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It even has the trail called the Continental Divide Trail that follows the divide for almost 2 miles. The highlight of the park was getting to the overlook at the top of the park loop. You look out into endless trees and you can see Savanna and Wolf Lake, the two lakes that fall on both sides of the Savanna Portage. For those who don't know, the Savanna Portage was the route used to get between the two sides of the Continental Divide. 34. Moose Lake. This one is definitely underrated. Not many people know about this park, but people should. It has some nice shoreline on Echo Lake and some nice trails through pine forests. The park is 829 acres in Carlson County and is named for the town of Moose Lake. The trails south of the road are more interesting, but the ones north of the road are more numerous. I would do both. They make for a 3-mile hike most of the time. I didn't find any bugs at this park when I went there, which was another reason it ranked so high. 33. Father Hennepin. Father Hennepin State Park is the other state park located on Mille Lake, and the better one by a lot. The park is only 275 acres, but it seems much more well managed than Mille Kathio. Trails were in better condition, basically no mosquitoes, and plenty of views of the lake. The park was plenty popular too, with a church group playing volleyball at the beach and lots of campers. This park was a nice refresher after Mille Kathio on the same day. I wish I could have ranked it in the 20s because that's what it deserved, but I will settle for 33. 32. Nerstrand Big Woods. Nerstrand Big Woods State Park is located in Rice County. The park is 1,646 acres and contains 11 miles of trails. The highlight of these trails is definitely Hidden Falls, located a half a mile from the parking area. This spring was a wet one, so when we went to the falls, they were very much flowing, so much that you couldn't get across the concrete blocks without getting your feet wet. Other than that, the park is mostly just a nice forest to walk through, but I would definitely recommend the north trails over the south trails. The south trails have basically no drainage and were super waterlogged. They are also less interesting in general. Definitely one of the best parks in the south central region of the state. 31. Minneopa. Minneopa State Park is 1,617 acres in Blue Earth County just west of Mankato. The park is located on the Minnesota River, and the main trail in the park goes around a bison enclosure. The trail was great, preserving a section of prairie atop a bluff on the Minnesota River where the bison lived. The Setman Mill stood tall atop the bluff that you parked on. My only complaint about this park is that not all the trails connect. If I could reach the waterfall on foot from the Setman parking area, I would be more inclined to rank this park higher. The park has a separate falls area that you can park at and walk to a 10-foot waterfall, which continues to another 40-foot waterfall. The falls were amazing, and they caused this park to be the best-ranked park in the south central region of the map. 30. Lake Maria. We entered the top 30. Lake Maria State Park was the 7th state park I hit on my journey around the state. The 1,500-acre park had a perfect 5-mile loop that covered basically the entire park that me and my grandma did. This park was on my top 15 for so long, and it finally fell out when I went further north. Great little park that not a lot of people hear about. It's also only an hour from the Twin Cities. 29. Glendalough. Minnesota's newest state park is Glendalough State Park in Otter Tail County. Established in 1991, the park used to be a private fishing retreat for the owners of the main newspaper in the Twin Cities, the Star Tribune. Now the land is a 1,924-acre park that contains 3 lakes and parts of 2 other lakes. A large portion of the trail in this park is paved, meaning mosquitoes were a non-factor here. The lakes were nice and clear, and both my mom and grandma came with me to this park so they could paddleboard. They loved it. The creek through this park also looked prime for kayaking, deep, clear, and flowing at a good pace. I saw people in inner tubes floating down it. 28. Lake Vermilion-Soudan Underground Mine. From Minnesota's newest state park to the state park with the newest land addition, Lake Vermilion-Soudan Underground Mine State Park is located in St. Louis County and is about 3,800 acres. The park used to just be 1,000 acres and was called Soudan Underground Mine State Park. In my opinion, they should just change the name to Vermilion-Soudan State Park to make things easier. It's got a long name right now. My main complaint with this park, besides the mosquitoes and the name, was the trail system being a little hard to choose from. I could either do the 5-mile loop at the mine or the 3-mile loop up by the lake, because the only connection was a 3-mile out and back that I didn't really want to do. I chose the mine, and it was probably a good decision. I won't ever know. The mine area is basically on top of a mountain, so the views were nice. The best part of it was exploring the old mine area. I was also far enough east that there were some rocky formations in the park, so it was nice to see that as well. After hiking my 5 miles, I drove over to the Vermilion area, which was established in 2014, and it sure looked like it. Everything was brand new, there were lots of people around. It takes 5 to 10 minutes of driving to get back to that part of the park, though. 27. Afton. Entering the B tier, Afton State Park is located in Washington County, and was the second park I visited on my journey. The 1,600-acre park lies on the dammed-up St. Croix River on the Wisconsin border. This park is really elevated by the many different landscapes found within it. Atop the bluffs is mostly grassland, reminding me of South Dakota, while the ravines and valleys are plenty forested with some rock outcrops here and there. The park has 20 miles of hiking trails catering to the many people that make the half-hour drive out of the Twin Cities to get there. Because of its variety, the park is the highest ranked park in the central metro region of the map. 26. Schoolcraft. Next up, we have Minnesota's second smallest state park. Schoolcraft State Park is located in Cass County on the Mississippi River and is 141 acres. While the park may seem small, it definitely specializes in the things that it has to offer. I hiked 1.5 miles here, and it was probably the best walk in the woods out of any of the parks I had been to up to that point. The tall pines and reddish pine needles on the trail really made this park stand out. That and the fact that there were basically no bugs because you were always within a third of the mile from the campground. It was a much needed break from the very buggy parks of the Northwoods. Schoolcraft was also the best ranked park in the north central Minnesota region of the map. 25. Lake Bemidji. Lake Bemidji State Park is a 1,653-acre park located on the northeast shore of Lake Bemidji in Beltrami County. This was the park I did right after Itasca, so I was expecting equal amounts of bugs. Luckily, that was not the case at all. I had basically zero bug issues, with the exception of a few spider webs on the trail. Not only that, the trails were in excellent condition, likely because the park is right next to the DNR headquarters for the region. Overall, the park just had a great variety of trails, from a bog boardwalk to tall pine groves to deciduous forests and nice lake views. The overlook deck was honestly amazing. Continuing with the trend, this park was the highest ranked park in the Northwoods region of the map. 24. Bearhead Lake. These last 3 parks are a good representation of where parks in the far northern forest would have ended up in the ranking if they didn't have any bugs. Schoolcraft, Lake Bemidji, and Bearhead Lake all had minimal bugs for where they were located. Bearhead Lake probably had the most, but the rocky landscape made up for it. Bearhead Lake State Park is a 3,013-acre park located in St. Louis County. The park has 14 miles of trails, and I hiked about 7 of them, with most of the other 7 being the Taconite State Trail, running through the northern part of the park. The 3 lakes I encountered in this park were beautiful, and rocks and pines everywhere made it feel like the Black Hills almost. Becky Lake was the smallest and least exciting of the 3, but my walk around Blueberry Lake was amazing. Bearhead Lake is obviously the main attraction, and it was by far the best lake because that was where the least amount of mosquitoes were, and because it was the largest and the rockiest. 23. Carly. Carly State Park is a 209-acre park located in Wabasha County. The park was mainly established to be an overflow campground for Whitewater State Park, so it is small. The park is heavily forested and contains 5 miles of trails. I hiked about 3 of them, and they were all very green and enjoyable. My favorite part of the park was probably the concrete blocks that acted as a bridge to get over the north branch of the Whitewater River. It made the hike feel more like an adventure. 22. Camden. This is the Golden Park, as I visited it 22nd and it ranked 22nd in the ranking. The park is 1,855 acres in Leon County, and it contains 16 miles of trails. The park covers a great stretch of forested bluffs along the Redwood River in southwest Minnesota. I hiked about 8 miles here, and they had a great variety from forested hills to hilltop prairies. Camden might be one of the hidden gems of Minnesota, but you might hear me say that with a lot of these parks in the higher ranks. 21. Sibley. Sibley is another good spot in west central Minnesota. The 2,500-acre park is located just north of Willmar and has some of the best morainal hills in the area. The rolling hills are really what give this park its character. There are 3 names for the peaks in the park too: Badger Hill, Little Mount Tom, and Mount Tom. Mount Tom is the most famous of the 3 and rises to about 1,375 feet above sea level, about 200 feet above Lake Andrew, the other thing the park is known for. Lake Andrew is the lake that lies on the south end of Sibley, and it was the first truly clear lake I saw on my journey, 31 parks in. Sibley is definitely one to check out, even if you live in the Twin Cities over 2 hours away. 20. Maplewood. We enter the top 20 with a bang. Maplewood State Park is a large park located in Otter Tail County that has 25 miles of trails. The park is over 8,000 acres and provides many hiking opportunities for outdoorsy people like me. Maplewood was also where I did the most miles in one day at 17 miles. I did the entire outer park loop, so I got to experience the entire scope of the 8,000-acre park. The mix of grassland, forest, and water is what really gives this park character. The rolling hills are amazing. You round a corner to see another one of the hundreds of lakes in the park. The forested hills sometimes reminded me of the Driftless area. The Holloway Hill overlook was the best part of the hike, with an impressive view of Leda Lake, which reminded me of a mini Lake Superior. You can also get an amazing view of many of the smaller lakes in the park. The one con of this park was the insane amount of ticks I found here. 19. Blue Mounds. Minnesota's southwesternmost state park comes in at number 19. Blue Mounds State Park contains something you wouldn't expect to find in the plains of southwest Minnesota. The 1,600-acre park in Rock County is centered around a 100-foot-tall Sioux quartzite cliff that stretches for over 2 miles. The lower cliffline trail allows you to see the rock in full color, while the upper cliffline trail showcases the great views of the surrounding farmland and the town of Laverne. The park is also well known, as I went on Memorial Day and the place was packed. The best part of the hike was definitely discovering the quarry, so that is a place to hit while you're there. Blue Mounds is also the best park in the southwest region of the map. 18. Forestville Mystery Cave. The place is called Forestville for a reason. The park is incredibly green with ferns and hardwoods everywhere. Something to know is that the cave is actually located in a separate unit a few miles west of the park and requires a reserved tour to explore. I only explored the Forestville part of the park, as the cave tours only happen on weekends, and that didn't fit into my schedule. The Sinkhole Ridge Trail was definitely my favorite of the 13 miles I hiked here. The park is also quite sizable at 3,163 acres. This park is also a Golden State Park. I visited it 18th and it ranked 18th as well. After the Sinkhole Ridge Trail, you should also go explore Forestville, the ghost town located within the park. The Root River Valley is really what gives this park scenic value. 17. Glacial Lakes. This is another hidden gem. I really did not expect this park to be this good. When I first got home from the park, it ranked 8th out of the 32 parks, which is quite impressive. The park is contending with some of the other parks in the Driftless area. The park is 1,857 acres and contains 16 miles of trails. I did 10 miles of those and 9 were enjoyable. Less than 20% of the park is forested, and I went on a cloudy day, so it meant a nice long grassland hike with no mosquitoes. The only time I found mosquitoes was when I was hiking around Signalness Lake, the only forested lake in the park. Because of the grassland landscape, you could see really far all the time, so a lot of the southern part of the park was just one big long overlook. The view from the High Peak Trail was even better. The park reminded me of western South Dakota, and I loved it. This was the highest ranked park in the west central Minnesota region, and the highest ranked park in the western half of Minnesota as a whole. 16. John A. Latsch. John A. Latsch State Park is a small park in Winona County. The park is about 400 acres and contains about half a mile of trails. However, it also contains more than 300 stairs. The one trail in the park takes you from the bottom of the Mississippi River Valley to the top of Charity Bluff, about 400 feet above the river. This is the best view that any park can give you in the Driftless area, as the Mississippi River is a truly impressive river to look out upon. This park would be in the top 10 if it was larger and had more trails, but I did have to save those top 10 spots for parks with more substance. 15. Great River Bluffs. Oddly enough, this park didn't live up to its name. The park is great, don't get me wrong, but the trail format just really didn't do it for me. All the trails were out and back, which gets boring after a while. There were plenty of great overlooks, with the best being either the Kings Bluff or the East Overlook. Great River Bluffs is a 2,122-acre park in Winona County, just north of Interstate 90. The park is the top of the B tier, so onward we go into the final two tiers. 14. Banning. Entering the A tier, we have Banning State Park, a 5,600-acre park located adjacent to Interstate 35 in Pine County. This park was refreshing because I had been battling mosquitoes for very long hikes in the last 4 or 5 parks I had went to, and while there were mosquitoes in part of this park, they weren't in the interesting parts. I hiked 8 miles at this park, and this first 5 miles were just through the woods at the north end of the park. Quite a few mosquitoes. However, as I made my way south towards the Kettle River, they began to fizzle out. I'm not sure why that was. I made it to the intersection at the southwest corner of the park and decided to hike the quarter-mile trail spur down to Wolf Creek Falls. This turned out to be a great decision. As I got closer to the falls, the terrain got more and more rocky. I made it to the falls, a short waterfall into a pool at the bottom. The water was flowing down an exposed rock all the way down to the falls, no creek bed. I made my way along the river back to the car and came across some of the most impressive rapids I've seen at any Minnesota state park. There were so many cool spots on the Kettle River to go out on a rock and take pictures. I would definitely recommend this park to people who live in the Twin Cities. 13. Interstate. Another park I would recommend to Twin Cities dwellers, Interstate State Park is located on the St. Croix River about 45 minutes north of the Twin Cities. The 288-acre park has a number of different natural features, from the river to granite cliffs to sandstone bluffs. The best route through the park, in my opinion, is to walk along the river from the campground at Taylor's Falls at the north end of the park. Explore the potholes area, and then walk through town to get to the upper trail on the other side of the highway and take that back down. And do the Sandstone Bluffs Trail if you are looking for some great views, both close-up and vistas. Parks on the east side of Minnesota are truly unparalleled. 12. Gooseberry Falls. I can hear the screams now. How is this not number 1? You could have at least put it in the top 5. I have reasons. Gooseberry Falls is a 1,741-acre park located in Lake County on Minnesota Highway 61, 40 minutes north of Duluth on Lake Superior. While this park has some of the best groomed trails near the main attraction of all parks on the North Shore, it has some of the worst trails when it comes to low-traffic routes. All the grass on the low-traffic trails was really overgrown, and the trails were just uninteresting in general. Normally, this would put it higher, but with the crowds of people everywhere when I made it back to the falls area was enough to send it down to 12th. With that being said, the Gitchigami Loop Trail gets a low amount of traffic and is awesome, and I would also recommend hiking up to the Fifth Falls, as when I made it there, I had it all to myself. 11. Judge C.R. Magny. This was the one park on the North Shore where the mosquitoes were kind of bad. However, they were only bad in the back of the park on the Gauthier Creek Trail. While the park is 4,300 acres, the main attraction is the Devil's Kettle, which occupies a very small portion of the park, and the rest of the park isn't that interesting, which is why Judge Magny State Park ranks out of the top 10. The Devil's Kettle is a set of waterfalls that split the Brule River into two. The one on the east side of the river flows downstream and into Lake Superior, while the one on the west side of the river flows into the Devil's Kettle, underground, and humans are not sure where it comes out. Most have concluded the water flows back into the Brule River shortly after the falls, but you can believe what you want. 10. Cascade River. This one contends with Gooseberry for the worst trails. The trails on the northwest corner of the park are quite overgrown, and there were quite a few mosquitoes. With that being said, the park makes up for it with its 10 miles of shoreline on Lake Superior, something that no other park has. We hiked about 2 miles of shoreline on the way back to the car from the east end of the park. The main features of the park are definitely Lookout Mountain, which technically isn't in the park but connects to the trail system, and the Cascade River with its many falls and rapids, as well as the shoreline along Lake Superior. Most people hang out near the river, so if you want to avoid the people, seek out one of the other locations. The park is 2,867 acres in Cook County. 9. Temperance River. Continuing with the top 10, we have the 1,134-acre Temperance River State Park south of Tofty. The North Shore is heavy in the top 10, but a lot of it is in the bottom half of the top 10. The two main features of the Temperance River are the river itself and the two peaks at the northeast end of the park, Tofty Peak and Carlton Peak. The two peaks tower 900 feet above Lake Superior, making for great views of the North Shore. You can take the Superior hiking trail from the peaks down to the river area, where the river goes from a wide, fast stream filled with rocks to a narrow vertical water flow with high rock walls on both sides. There are incredible views of the river from all along it, definitely a spot to check out. If you want low traffic trails, try the section between the Temperance and the Cross River, or even better, walk up the service road to access Carlton Peak past the quarry. The quarry has unique views that you won't get from the top of the peaks as well. 8. Grand Portage. At the top of the A tier and at the end of the arrowhead, we have Grand Portage State Park, a 278-acre park located on the Pigeon River and the Canadian border. This park is home to the highest waterfall in Minnesota at 120 feet, and a second 40-foot waterfall if you are willing to make the 5-mile round-trip hike. So we headed back there. On the way back, there is an amazing overlook of Lake Superior, and you can go around the back to see the Pigeon River Valley, which is surrounded by mountains. We came down back to the river and eventually made it to the falls. We threw rocks to Canada and probably could have jumped over the river if we wanted. My dad even got the text message from T-Mobile that said, "Welcome to Canada." Honestly, this park was the perfect one to end my journey on, and I'm so glad I could make it work. It is worth the hour drive from Grand Marais to see the falls and the amazing views. 7. Frontenac. Entering the S tier, we start off with Frontenac State Park, a 2,200-acre park in Goodhue County. The park is situated atop a bluff on Lake Pepin, a lake made out of the Mississippi River. The park has a nice mix of landscapes from prairie south of the bluff to hardwood forests right on the river. The bluff is 430 feet above the river, and you can hike up and down it. There's also an old quarry on the east side of the bluff. The park is only an hour from the Twin Cities, making it a popular place for people who live there. 6. George H. Crosby Manitou. This park is heavily underrated. There are 8 state parks on the North Shore, and this is the only one that doesn't really have access to Lake Superior. Nonetheless, the park is still amazing and I loved it. The best parts are definitely the 3 miles along the Manitou River. It's just nice to have that sound of rushing water near the trail. The Misquaw Hill overlook has a rather impressive view, and there's a campsite up there too. At the north end of the river trail is Manitou Falls, which feels like the boundary between the North Shore and the North Woods. If you look upstream, you see calm waters and pine trees, while downstream is filled with cascades, rapids, and rocky waters. All the trails are relatively interesting too. Monson Lake would also be a cool lake for paddleboarders. The only potential problem with this park is the amount of parking there. There are only about 15 spots in the lot, and it would be easy to be out of a parking spot there. The park is 6,200 acres and has 24 miles of trails. 5. Beaver Creek Valley. Another underrated location. All the underrated S-tier parks ended up being in the lower half. I think everyone familiar with Minnesota will have heard of the 4 parks above this. Beaver Creek Valley is Minnesota's southeasternmost state park, 715 acres in Houston County, just north of Caledonia. I went to this park on a day where it was 53 and misting, so with the surrounding forest and creek, it felt like walking in a fairy tale. I started walking north from the lot towards the wider end of the valley. I climbed Plateau Rock and almost slid down the hill because of the amount of mud. There were many nice little bridges over Beaver Creek at this park. I couldn't stop taking pictures of them. The creek moved fast and was loud too. The southern part of the park was also interesting with the cliffs near Big Spring and the rock outcroppings along the trail. It might be the most interesting trail in Minnesota. This is a really underrated spot, and it is the top park that I haven't had people mention to me, so if you are looking for an awesome quiet spot, go here. 4. Jaycook. The big ones are here. Jaycook is an 8,125 acre park in Carleton County just south of Duluth. It features 8 of the final miles of the St. Louis River before it empties into Lake Superior. The river is filled with lopsided basalt bedrock that makes jagged teeth jutting out of the water. Not only that, but this is the steepest section of the river, with it descending more than 50 feet every mile that is in the park, from over 1,000 to 600 feet above sea level. The rapids and waterfalls are amazing here. Everyone loves the swinging bridge, but if I were to recommend a trail, take the Carleton Trail up the river from the swinging bridge to the paved trail, and then choose a way back on the other side of the river. There are several options, from routes along the road, on dirt trails, or continue on the paved trail to the parking lot. The Minnesota DNR really scored with this piece of land. The river is amazing, and the overlooks on the Ogans Trail really give you a full scope of it. 3. Split Rock Lighthouse. I almost made this second, but there were very minor drawbacks. First, the trails in my number 2 park never ceased to be interesting, while there was a 1-mile segment at Split Rock Lighthouse that was a little boring. That was the main reason, with the trail conditions also being a bit of a factor. Some were a little wet. With that out of the way, Split Rock Lighthouse is a 2,112 acre park in Lake County south of Beaver Bay. The park's amount of shoreline on Lake Superior comes second to only Cascade River when it comes to the amount of it. The views are better though. From Day Hill to the Superior Hiking Trail overlook to along the shore, this park has some of the best Lake Superior views of any park on the North Shore. It has some amazing rocky points that really give you a sense as to how big that lake actually is. I would take it over Gooseberry any day. The park has so much more to offer. 2. Whitewater. This one was not on my radar, but it was on the radar of many other Minnesotans I talked to. It is clearly a popular park among the people there, but because it was not on my radar, I was left dumbfounded as to how amazing the park was. There truly wasn't a bit of trail that was boring. It was either down by a creek within view of a ridge or on a ridge. This park could not bore me. Inspiration Point was my favorite overlook of the 5 at the park. However, I would approach it from the north as I climbed down a ladder-like staircase right after I passed it. The bluffs along the Whitewater River are amazing and remind me of places further east. The park is 1,672 acres and has 10 miles of trails. I would recommend the 7.5-mile loop that I did all along the edge of the park, starting at the main office and going clockwise around the outer edge of trails. My grandparents only live a tad over an hour from there, so when I'm in that area, I'm taking someone else there. Truly an amazing park. 1. Tetagouche. I kind of thought that Tetagouche was going to be number 1 right from the get-go, and I was right. It was the only park to show up whitewater after 47 parks of exploring. Tetagouche is just under 9,000 acres and contains 23 miles of trails. The park also has 30 overlooks, tripling the amount of the park, with the second most, Gooseberry Falls, with 10. Not only that, but they named all the overlooks too. And with that being said, I would like to inform hikers that the Palisade Valley Overlook is the best overlook in the park. We hiked 15 miles at Tetagouche, averaging more than 1 overlook per mile because we checked out 16 of them. And I will warn you, if you check out all the overlooks, add 3+ miles to your journey because it's like a quarter of a mile off the trail to get to all of them. Not only are there overlooks, but there are also waterfalls. There are the High Falls and the Two-Step Falls, which are easily accessible from the loop that we did. There's also a hidden unnamed falls on Palisade Creek just north of Palisade Creek Overlook. We filled up on water there. Overall, this park is unmatched for overlooks, and the trails remain interesting throughout, so pick an overlook and hike to it. You won't be disappointed. The Minnesota State Park system is formidable and impressive, and I had an absolute ton of fun exploring it this summer. A general rule of thumb is that the further east you go, the better parks get. However, this isn't always the case. Glacial Lakes and Blue Mounds are better than Scenic and McCarthy Beach, for example. If you have questions, ask. I will definitely answer them to the best of my ability. If you made it to the end, I thank you for watching. Hopefully this encourages you to explore more.